Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into some really complex territory. Stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination.
That's right. And the sources we're looking at, they don't pull any punches. They lay out definitions, but also some really stark examples.
Yeah, they do. So our goal today is to really unpack these ideas, what they mean, the whole context around race and culture, and even how scientists have thought about this stuff over time.
Exactly. We want to move from these, heavy concepts to something clearer, maybe more manageable to understand.
Okay, so where do we start? The sources jump right in with the real-world impact, the human cost. It mentions the persistence of racial injustice in the U.S.
Yes, and it uses some powerful examples to illustrate that.
Like the Jena 6 case back in 2006. That one really struck a nerve nationally, didn't it?
It really did. It's almost a textbook case of how simmering racial tensions can lead to incredibly biased outcomes.
So remind us, it started with black students sitting under a tree.
Yeah, a tree on campus known informally as the white tree. The principal said, okay, black students can sit there too. Simple enough, right?
You'd think so. But the reaction?
The immediate reaction was some white students hanging nooses from that exact tree.
Nooses. And the school board. What was their take?
They called it a prank, minimized it, which is pretty shocking in itself.
But then things escalated, and the legal system got involved.
Right, and that's where the bias becomes crystal clear. In the conflicts that followed, a white student involved in an attack on a black student got probation.
Okay.
But 6 black students who later assaulted a white student were charged initially with attempted murder. The disparity is just stark.
It really is. And this isn't just a recent thing. The sources also draw a parallel back to 1970. Kent State.
Ah, yes. Kent State. Everyone knows that name. 4 students killed by the National Guard during an anti-war protest. It's etched in history.
But then there was Jackson State.
Exactly. Just 10 days later, Jackson State, a predominantly black university, police opened fire, killed 2 students, wounded 12 more.
And the difference in attention.
Huge. Kent State became this major national event, a symbol. Jackson State. Far, far less coverage, less remembrance.
So the sources force you to ask,
Yeah.
why? Was it because Kent State was mostly white students and Jackson State was mostly black students?
It strongly implies that, yes, it asks you to consider how race might have played a role in how those tragedies were reported and remembered.
Okay, let's bring it to the present day. The sources mentioned George Floyd in 2020.
Right. His death sparked the massive Black Lives Matter protests. And for many people, it was maybe the first time they really confronted the reality of racially biased policing.
It felt like a moment where awareness shifted for a lot of people.
It did. And the research backs this up. It shows clear racial disparities throughout the criminal justice system. People of color, especially black people, tend to get harsher sentences.
They make up a much larger percentage of the prison population than their share of the general population.
Exactly. And the sources link this quite directly to cultural stereotypes.
Wow.
There's strong evidence suggesting these stereotypes, linking black people with criminality, feed into bias, both conscious bias, but also, crucially, unconscious bias against black men.
Right. That unconscious part is key. So we've seen the impact. Now we need to get clearer on the terms. The sources emphasize that we categorize people instantly. Race, gender, age are often the first things we notice.
Yes. And understanding race itself is fundamental here.
So how did the sources define race? Because it feels like something solid biological.
That's the common understanding, yes, that it's about inherited, fixed biological traits. But the sources insist, and this is really important, race is primarily a social category.
Social, not biological. That feels counterintuitive, maybe?
It can be. But look at the history. The word race itself, used to group people like we do now, only really appeared in English around the 1600s. And even more telling, during legal segregation in the U.S., believe it or not, people could actually petition a court to change their official racial classification.
Wow. You couldn't do that if it was purely biological.
Exactly. It shows it's fluid, defined by society.
Yeah.
Think about how attitudes towards, say, Irish or Italian immigrants shifted in the early 1900s, or how views on Middle Easterners changed drastically after 9/11.
So the meaning changes with the times, with the cultural context.
Precisely. Race is real in its consequences, absolutely, but its definition is shaped by culture.
Which brings us to culture itself.
Yeah.
How's that defined?
Culture is described as this unique system of meaning and information. It's shared by a group, passed down across generations.
And it helps the group survive, pursue happiness, find meaning in life.
Basically, yes. And culture is what reinforces using these social categories, like race. Often, people within a culture share beliefs without even being fully aware they're operating within that specific cultural framework.
And these beliefs aren't neutral, are they? They tend to support existing power structures.
That's a key point. Cultural beliefs often serve to maintain social hierarchies, justifying why some groups have more status or power than others, often through stereotypes.
Okay, hierarchy leads directly to privilege. Group privilege. What's the core idea there?
Group privilege is basically an unearned advantage you get just by belonging to a certain group, maybe based on race, gender, class, sexual orientation, etc. It's not something you earned, it's conferred by the system.
And the crucial part is,
That privilege for one group usually means disadvantage or loss for another. The classic example is white privilege.
right, the idea that white people often don't have to think about how their race might helping them in everyday situations, dealing with police, applying for jobs, things like that.
Exactly. It's often invisible to those who have it.
Now, learning about this, it can be tough. The sources mention that some white people might feel attacked or defensive when confronted with this idea of unearned advantage.
Yes, realizing that inequality might benefit your own group can feel like a personal accusation, like a loss. It challenges your worldview.
So how do you move past that defensiveness?
The sources bring up something called critical hope. It acknowledges that it is difficult, that accepting inequality is hard,
Yeah.
but it suggests that real progress moving towards less racist beliefs actually requires letting that worldview be challenged, maybe even shattered. It's uncomfortable, but necessary for growth.
That's powerful. Okay, so we have the context. Race as social, culture reinforcing categories, privilege, the challenge of critical hope. Now let's nail down those core definitions. Stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination. How are they distinct?
It really boils down to three different things. Stereotypes are about beliefs, prejudice is about attitudes, specifically emotions, and discrimination is about behavior.
Okay, break that down. Stereotypes first.
Stereotypes are the beliefs and opinions we hold about what members of a group are, like their characteristics, attributes, behaviors.
So they describe what we think a group is like.
Yes, they're descriptive, but they can also be prescriptive, telling us what a group should be like or how they should behave. And they can even seem positive sometimes, but they're always generalizations learned from our culture.
Got it. Beliefs. Next, prejudice.
Prejudice is an attitude. It's directed towards people just because they belong to a particular group. Since it's an attitude, it's primarily emotional.
Emotion, like what?
Could be feelings like anger, fear, disgust, maybe resentment towards that group. The sources also mention it can link to personality traits like right-wing authoritarianism, which isn't about politics per se, but a psychological tendency towards obeying authority, aggression towards outgroups, and rigid thinking.
Okay, attitude, emotion. Finally, discrimination.
Discrimination is the behavior. It's acting differently towards people, treating them unfairly, based mainly on their group membership. This can be verbal, like insults, or behavioral, like avoiding someone or denying them opportunities.
Beliefs, attitudes, behavior.
Yeah.
But it's not always a straight line from one to the next, right?
Absolutely not. That's a crucial point. Knowing a stereotype doesn't automatically make you prejudiced.
There was a study on that.
Yes, Patricia Devine's work back in 1989 was groundbreaking. She found that people who scored high on prejudice measures and those who scored low actually knew the common stereotypes about African Americans equally well.
So what was the difference?
The difference was belief and rejection. The high prejudice people tended to accept the stereotypes as true. The low prejudice people consciously rejected them. They didn't endorse them.
And this seems like the really tricky part. Even if you consciously reject a stereotype, it can still affect you.
Yes. This is where implicit bias comes in. These are the automatic associations and reactions we have that operate outside our conscious awareness.
Like a gut reaction you don't even realize you're having.
Exactly. Stereotypic beliefs can get activated automatically, implicitly, and they can influence your behavior even if you genuinely believe you're not prejudiced and explicitly reject the stereotype. That's why things like the Jena 6 outcomes can happen. The bias might not always be conscious and deliberate.
That feels huge. It means just wanting to be fair isn't always enough.
It's often not enough, no. It requires active effort to counteract those implicit processes.
Okay, so if prejudice turns into discriminatory behavior, how does that play out on a larger scale? Beyond just one person treating another badly.
Good question. The sources identify 4 levels or types of discrimination. The first is interpersonal. That's the one-on-one unfair treatment we usually think of.
Okay.
Then you scale up. Organizational discrimination happens when the rules, policies, or common practices within organizations, think corporations, schools, hospitals, end up having discriminatory outcomes, even if they seem neutral on the surface.
Like a hiring practice that unintentionally screens out certain groups.
Exactly. Then there's institutional discrimination. This is even broader. It refers to the norms, policies, and practices embedded within major social institutions like the entire legal system, the housing market, the education system that result in different outcomes for different groups.
Also systemic issues.
Right. And finally, there's cultural discrimination. This is where one group, usually the dominant one, holds the power to define what's valued in the culture. Their norms become the standard, and other groups' values or ways of life are marginalized or seen as deficient.
That paints a really comprehensive picture of how deep this runs, and it affects many groups, not just based on race.
Oh, definitely. The sources list common targets, race and ethnicity, obviously, but also gender, sexual orientation, age, physical or mental ability.
Animalism, right.
Yes, and appearance, they call it lookism, classism, based on social
Uh-huh.
class, and religion, of course.
And when you combine prejudice against a group with a whole belief system about that group being inferior, and maybe your own group being superior, that's when you get the isms.
That's the idea. The isms like racism, sexism, heterosexism, ageism aren't just prejudice. They involve a belief system, often rooted in a desire for dominance, that one group is inherently superior and should rightfully be on top.
Racism often focuses on anti-black prejudice in the U.S. context because of history, but it applies more broadly.
Correct. And sexism has different facets too, like hostile versus seemingly benevolent sexism, which sounds nice but still reinforces traditional rules. Heterosexism stigmatizes anyone not heterosexual. Ageism targets based on age, ableism against people with disabilities.
It's a long list. And people don't just fit into one box, do they? That's where intersectionality comes in.
Absolutely, critical concept. Intersectionality highlights that people belong to multiple social groups simultaneously. You can't understand someone's experience just by looking at their race or their gender or their class in isolation.
You have to see how those identities intersect and interact.
Precisely, because social categories themselves are often defined based on the default assumptions of the dominant group historically, say, white, heterosexual, able-bodied men. Everyone else gets treated as a variation or an exception.
So a black woman's experience isn't just black experience plus woman's experience.
No, it's a unique intersectional experience shaped by both those identities interacting within the existing power structures. The sources even showed data on how stereotypes differ for women and men across different ethnic groups, illustrating just how complex those intersections are.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered definitions, context, impact. The last big piece is, how do we even get here in terms of understanding all this? How have scientists tried to explain prejudice over time?
Yeah, the thinking has really evolved. It's important to note, though, there's no single grand theory that explains everything, and a lot of the historical research has focused mainly on North America and Western Europe.
Got it. So where did the scientific thinking start?
Well, you had scientific racism way back pre-1920s, which wasn't really science as we know it. It was mostly about interpreting or misinterpreting research to make minority groups look bad and basically justify the existing social order. Prejudice was seen as like a natural response to inferior groups.
Thankfully, we moved past that. What came next?
In the 1920s up to the 50s, psychodynamic theory became influential. Think Freudian ideas. It suggested prejudice stemmed from universal psychological processes, often things that boosted the individual's ego, like projecting your own flaws onto others or finding a scapegoat.
So prejudice was seen as an individual problem, like a personality flaw.
Pretty much. It was viewed as irrational, a social problem rooted in individual motivational needs.
But did that explain why whole societies seem to share the same prejudices?
Not really. Oh, no. That led to the rise of sociocultural theory in the 1960s. This shifted the focus outside the individual.
It's a culture.
Exactly. It argued that prejudice and stereotypes are learned from your culture and the structure of society. Society provides the stereotypes, and people learn them.
Makes sense. Then what?
The 1970s brought intergroup relations theory. This focused on competition between groups as a source of prejudice. Like, if groups are competing for scarce resources, jobs, status, whatever prejudice arises. Relative deprivation theory is part of this feeling your group is unfairly disadvantaged compared to others. Social identity theory also fits here.
Social identity theory. That's about feeling good about your own group.
Yes, the need for a positive self-identity often comes from feeling positive about the groups you belong to, and distinguishing your group favorably from other groups. Competition fuels that.
Okay, competition. But then came the 1980s, and a big shift, right, with cognitive science.
A huge shift. This is where cognitive theory really took hold, and it's still dominant today. It fundamentally reframed the issue.
How so?
It proposed that prejudice is, in a way, universal and almost inevitable because stereotyping itself is just a normal cognitive process. It's a mental shortcut.
A shortcut.
Yeah, our brains are wired to simplify the incredibly complex social world. It's cognitively easier to lump people into categories and assume they're all similar than it is to process every single person as a unique individual. Categorization saves mental energy.
So our brains are kind of built to stereotype. That sounds a bit bleak.
Well, it suggests the tendency to categorize is automatic, a basic cognitive function. It doesn't mean prejudice or discrimination are inevitable outcomes, but it highlights that the root process is quite normal, cognitively speaking. Alongside this, you also have evolutionary theory.
How does that fit in?
It suggests some underlying tendencies, like suspicion or fear of strangers, outgroups, might have evolved way back when because they offered a survival advantage protecting your small group.
But that doesn't really apply now.
In our complex, interconnected modern world, that fear of strangers mechanism is mostly maladaptive and harmful, fueling prejudice rather than protecting us, but the underlying predisposition might still be there.
Okay. Wow. So we've gone from the painful reality of Jena 6, defined all these terms, belief, attitude, behavior, looked at the cultural context, and ended up with this modern view that maybe our brains are just trying to take shortcuts.
That's a good summary, yeah. We know beliefs can shape attitudes, which can lead to discriminatory behavior, and we know a lot of this can happen automatically, unconsciously, influenced by these cognitive shortcuts and cultural learning.
So where does that leave us? The sources end by asking the big question. How can we actually reduce prejudice and discrimination?
Right. And based on everything we've discussed, especially critical hope and this cognitive theory, if we accept that categorizing is a normal, maybe unavoidable mental process.
Then the goal isn't to stop categorizing, because that seems impossible.
Exactly. The real challenge, it seems, is to become aware of that automatic process and make the conscious effort to override it, to challenge our own implicit biases.
So the final thought for you, the listener, building on all this.
It's really this. Given that our brains might default to simplification and categorization, how much extra mental energy are you willing consciously to put in each day? How much effort will you expend to check your assumptions, question your gut reactions, and ensure that your beliefs, your attitudes, and ultimately your actions truly align with fairness and equity? That, the sources suggest, is the ongoing work.